Nice scar, rookie. Paper cut from the library? The words echoed across the dusty training grounds of Fort Hensley in the early morning. The desert sun had barely risen, yet the heat was already spreading across the base. Boots scuffed against the sand, metal bars rattled, and a line of recruits waited for their turn. Among them stood a young woman, Private Claire Donovan. Her uniform was spotless, her boots polished, her face expressionless. But when she lifted her left hand, every eye caught it. A scar, pale, thick, running from her wrist down to her palm. No one knew its story. At that moment, a voice rang out from behind. Private Mark Reynolds, grinning wide, called out, "Nice scar, rookie. Paper cut from the library?" A burst of laughter followed. Some added their own jokes. "Careful, rookie, those pages might attack again. Bet she burned herself in the kitchen." Laughter filled the morning air. Claire Donovan's face didn't change. She kept her eyes forward, carried her tray, and walked without breaking stride. Her silence fueled them. They mistook it for weakness. But no one knew, the scar had come from a place far darker than any of them imagined. Fort Hensley sat on the edge of the Nevada desert, a fictional but all too familiar training ground for the U.S. Army. Wind carried sand across the compound, the sky often turned amber with dust. Here, recruits endured weeks of relentless drills. Claire Donovan had been logged as quiet, disciplined, flawless in procedure. She handed in reports on time, never complained, and followed orders with precision. Among recruits, however, that only set her apart. They bonded through noise, jokes, and mistakes. Claire gave them none of that. So they gave her a label, rookie. And the scar made it easy. That morning's drill was the endurance course, walls to climb, barbed wire to crawl under, trenches to slog through. Recruits grinned nervously, cracking jokes to hide their fear. Claire waited her turn in silence. When she stepped up, all eyes were on her. The scar stretched taut as she gripped the ropes. Reynolds shouted from the back, "Hey rookie, don't let that old wound pop open!" More laughter. Claire didn't respond. She climbed. While others struggled, she moved smoothly, hand over hand, without hesitation. At the top, she paused for a moment. Below, recruits stared with surprise. But she didn't meet their gaze. She climbed down, wordless. That night, whispers spread through the barracks. "Probably cut herself on glass as a kid. Looks like a kitchen accident. No, she's just a rookie. Probably slipped on a book spine." Claire sat silently on her bunk. A small notebook rested in her lap. She opened it, wrote a few lines, and traced her finger along the scar. One soldier, half awake, glanced over. He swore later it looked like she was talking to it. The next day brought marksmanship training. Targets lined the field at 50 meters. Sergeant Miller barked out, "Listen up! Anyone who misses pulls night watch. Line up!" Recruits fired. Some hit dirt, some hit air. Jokes flew, confidence cracked. Then it was Claire's turn. As she raised her rifle, silence fell. The scar pressed against the grip. Reynolds called again. "Careful, rookie, don't let the rifle cut you this time." Claire didn't flinch. She aimed. First shot, bullseye. Second shot, bullseye. Third shot, bullseye. Miller's brows lifted. The laughter died. Claire set the rifle down without ceremony. "Task complete, Sergeant," she said calmly, and stepped back. But every recruit thought the same thing. No rookie shoots like that. When the group dispersed, Sergeant Miller stepped closer. His tone was low. "Where'd you learn that, Private?" Claire's eyes didn't waver. "From books, Sergeant." Miller studied her face. The words were neat, but the look in her eyes wasn't learned from books. That night, while the barracks slept, a shadow moved across the training ground. Claire knelt in the sand, rifle in her hands. She disassembled it piece by piece, then reassembled it, all with her eyes closed. Her fingers were precise, swift, certain. No one saw her. Or maybe, someone did. Days began to blur into one another at Fort Hensley. The desert heat pressed down harder each morning, the wind carrying sand across the training grounds. But more than the heat, the weight of silence was felt everywhere. Claire Donovan still ate alone. While laughter filled the crowded tables, she sat in the same corner every day. She finished her meals slowly, cleared her tray without a word, then pulled out her small notebook to write a few lines. That notebook had become an obsession among the recruits. No one knew what was inside. But everyone wanted to. One night in the barracks, 3 recruits whispered back and forth. "I swear that scar's just a childhood accident. Why else wouldn't she explain it? No way. Did you see her shooting? That woman's hiding something. Maybe she came from some secret unit. Like one of those ghost missions." Finally, one raised his voice. "Hey Donovan! That scar, where'd you get it?" Claire sat up on her bunk, eyes locking onto the soldiers. She didn't say a word. The silence was sharper than any answer. Then she turned back to her notebook. But this time, she pressed her finger against the scar as she wrote. As if to say, "The answer's here, but not for you." The next evening, after her shift ended, Claire wandered to the edge of the base. The sun dipped low, throwing the desert into amber light. Most recruits huddled in the shade. But Claire stood alone, one hand pressed to the scar on her palm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. From a distance, Sergeant Miller watched. At first, he'd written her off as quiet, disciplined, odd rookie. But in that moment, he noticed something different. Claire's eyes weren't the eyes of a rookie. They belonged to someone who had seen further than this desert. The next day, the recruits were assigned to help reorganize the depot, crates of weapons, parts, old documents piled everywhere. Chaos ruled the room. One soldier misplaced a rifle component. Nobody could find it. Claire stepped forward. Without even glancing around, she walked straight to the correct shelf and set it down where it belonged. The soldier frowned. "How the hell did you know that? You've never worked here before." Claire shrugged. "The labels are clear enough," she said softly. But no one noticed. The labels were covered in dust, unreadable. At dinner that evening, another recruit called out, "Hey rookie, what's in that notebook of yours? Love letters? Or bedtime stories for your scar?" Laughter followed. Until the door opened. Captain Harris stepped in. The room froze instantly. Harris scanned the tables with his hard eyes, his boots echoing against the floor. Then his gaze landed on Claire in the corner. For just a moment, his eyes lingered on her hand, on the scar. And the silence grew heavier. That night, Sergeant Miller was summoned to Captain Harris's office. When the door shut, Harris spoke bluntly. "This Donovan, she's strange. Too quiet, too perfect. And that scar?" Miller nodded slowly. "I saw her on the range. A rookie doesn't shoot like that." Harris closed the file on his desk. "Her records look clean. But my gut tells me otherwise." A few days later, Claire was assigned night watch. The desert cold bit into her skin as she stood in the guard tower, alone beneath a silver moon. The other soldiers nearby joked loudly to keep themselves warm. But Claire kept silent, her breath steady. Her scar glowed faintly under the moonlight. A young soldier next to her noticed and asked without thinking, "Rookie, what's the story behind that scar?" Claire turned her head. For a moment their eyes locked. But she gave no reply. Instead, she looked back toward the horizon. As though she could see something there, shadows from a past no one else could imagine. By now, there was only one topic in the entire unit, Claire Donovan's scar. The laughter had died down. In its place was curiosity, restless, consuming. But no one could break through her silence. And that silence grew stronger each day, like a wall none of them could climb. It was no longer just about her past. It was about the feeling that whatever Claire was hiding might shape their future too. One blistering day at Fort Hensley, the desert heat pressed heavier than ever on the recruits. During a grueling endurance test, one soldier fixed his eyes on Claire's hand. The scar stood out under the sun, pale but undeniable. Laughter burst out. "Rookie! Gonna fight with that scar? Maybe the kitchen's hiring. The group roared with amusement. But this time, Claire stopped walking. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then slowly lifted them again. And at that exact moment, Captain Harris stepped onto the field. His voice cracked through the sand like steel striking stone. Silence! The air froze. Harris strode directly toward Claire. Donovan! Show me your hand. Without hesitation, she lifted her left hand. The scar stretched from her wrist into her palm, harsh and raw. Harris studied it closely. Then his voice cut like a blade. Where did you get this? Claire's eyes darkened. Permission to remain silent, sir. Sergeant Miller held his breath. Recruits stood rigid, waiting. Harris took a step closer. This is Fort Hensley. Secrets don't belong here. Speak. Claire's voice was quiet, but sharp as glass. Afghanistan border. You won't find it in the files, because it was never recorded. A ripple of whispers spread. Harris's brow furrowed. What mission? Claire's gaze locked on the horizon. Her words fell heavy. Operation Night Vale. Miller's eyes widened. Harris's face went stone cold. That name had no place in official records. It was whispered only in the most restricted halls, where only a handful of officers dared speak it. Claire lifted her hand again, showing the scar in the sunlight. This came from an ambush. The comms were dead. I pulled 2 men out, but I couldn't carry the third. Steel tore into my palm, and it never left. Her voice did not tremble. But her eyes carried the weight of years she had never spoken aloud. The field went silent. No more laughter. Only the echo of boots shifting in the sand. Captain Harris's tone shifted, not harsh, but heavy. Your name isn't in those files. But that scar, it tells the truth. He turned to the recruits, his voice carrying across the field. You call her rookie. I see something else, a survivor. Someone who came back from a mission no one will ever read about, and chose silence over glory. The recruits looked down at their boots, shame weighing heavier than heat. From that day forward, everything changed at Fort Hensley. No one mocked Claire again. No one dared glance at her notebook with jokes. Because they understood now, the notebook didn't hold love letters or bedtime stories. It held fragments of memories too heavy to be spoken aloud. At night watch, Claire still stood silently in the towers. But now, the soldiers beside her shared that silence, not as a burden, but as respect. One evening at sunset, the entire unit was called into formation. The sky burned orange, shadows stretching across the desert. Captain Harris's voice rose above the still air. Sometimes there are no medals. Sometimes there are no records. Only scars. What you see in Donovan's hand is not weakness, it's a reminder. Real courage can live in silence. The recruits turned their eyes to Claire. And for the first time, there was no laughter. One by one, heads bowed. That night, Claire opened her notebook. She placed the pen beside her scar and wrote a single line. Those who know true strength never need to prove it. She closed the page. And for the first time, allowed herself a faint smile in the dark. At Fort Hensley, no one saw her as the rookie anymore. She was the quiet strength hidden in plain sight. And the scar was no longer a mark of mockery, but of respect.